Today, we're talking about the 2026 CGT trap and exactly how the wealthy are legally hiding their property. The media and the government want to believe that slashing capital gains tax discount is going to miraculously fix this housing crisis by punishing the greedy landlords. They want you to think it's an issue of intergenerational fairness, but that is a complete lie. The government is actually using this policy to cover up their own massive failures, and the only people who will pay the price are everyday middle-class investors who are just trying to build a future. The ultra wealthy, they're not worried at all, but we spoke to them. They're not worried. Therefore, we need to talk about how they are using entirely legal tax structures to completely bypass this CGT pain. So in this video, I'm going to break down the exact blueprint of what is really happening behind closed doors. First, we'll expose the massive government cover-up driving these tax charges. And second, I'll reveal the smart money structures the 1% are using to shield their portfolios right now, today. By the way, I am Lucky Velasquez. I own a buyer's agency and a mortgage broking firm. And for the last decade, I'm an REB buyer's agent innovation winner for investment. And I am also an MPA top 100 broker. And I've spent my career helping hundreds of families to retire quicker, wealthier, and with absolute clarity. Let's dive in. So let's go. Let's start with the reality of what the government's doing. So right now, if you have an investment property for more than, say, 12 months, you get a 50% discount on your capital gains tax. But the government is interesting. They're proposing to slash that discount down to 33% or even 25%, which is ludicrous. And why are they doing this? The Treasury will tell you that 50% discount costs the budget an estimated $19.7 billion a year. They claim that slashing the discount will make housing more affordable for first-time buyers and then fix the property market, which is complete nonsense. So it's not about the housing affordability. It's actually more of a desperate tax grab on middle-class salary earners who did the right thing, took personal responsibility and invested for their future so they wouldn't have to rely on a taxpayer-funded pension. They want you to picture this landlord as these greedy monopoly men or women holding dozens of houses. The data tells a completely different story. Firstly, did you know that about 1 in 7 Australians now own an investment property? Just 1 in 7. That's roughly 2.26 million everyday people, and they are absolutely not the ultra wealthy elites the media paints them out to be. So according to the latest ATO stats, a massive 72% of all property investors own just one. If you include people who own 2 properties, that covers almost 90% of the market. Now, this is a completely different story to what the media is portraying. The media is portraying, everyone has these massive portfolios. No, like nearly 80 to 90% of investment properties in Australia own 1, max 2 properties. Did you know how many investors actually own a massive portfolio? Let's talk about that. How many people actually own it? 6 or more properties, less than 1%. These aren't billionaires. These are nurses, tradies, and then they're also teachers. In fact, nearly half of all the property investors, 41.4%, actually reported a net rental loss recently. They are everyday Australians who did the right thing. They took personal responsibility and invested for their future and their kids. Nothing wrong with that. Retired quicker, and instead of picking the supply bottleneck that they created, the government is changing the tax laws and then blaming you for it. So now, if you listen to Real Estate Institute of Australia or the Property Council, they will tell you that cutting the CGT discount will cause a massive rent explosion. Now, they claim landlords will just hike rents to cover the lost tax incentives, making the rental prices worse. I think it's going to really backfire if they do this. But the data doesn't actually support the apocalyptic. When investors sell, the property doesn't vanish into thin air. It gets bought by usually another owner-occupier, which simply removes a renter from the renter pool. So the rental supply-demand balance remains largely unaffected. So the Gradient Institute even estimated that halving the discount would result in a tiny, less than $1 per week increase in median rents, which is crazy. The real threat of the CGT change isn't the rent explosion, it's something worse. It's called asset lock-in, right? So what is asset lock-in? If the government changes the rules, existing assets will likely be grandfathered, meaning properties you already own, keep the 50% discount. But if you sell and buy something new, you get hit with this CGT discount. If the government changes the rules, existing assets will likely be grandfathered, meaning properties you already own, keep the old 50% discount. But if you sell and buy something new, you get hit with the new brutal tax rate. What will current landlords do? I know what I'll be doing. Absolutely nothing. They'll they'll most likely hold their properties forever to keep their embedded tax advantages. So they'll hold the best properties, which will completely choke the supply of good stock in the market, and you won't see a massive crash. What you will see is a frozen market where nobody wants to sell because the tax penalty is too high. They either just keep rebuying, or they just hold it and hold it really until their tax bracket is a little bit lower in the future, or kind of have it over the edge, but they'll hold it for themselves. And you got to think about it like this. If a property is truly performing, like really performing, why do you really need to offload it? They're kind of not so good performing properties. Those will go to the marketplace, and people with low budgets, which is usually as owner occupiers, are the ones going to then acquire them. The best properties, if it's an investment, it makes sense for the landlord just to keep. The government is trapping everyday investors in their properties, and they're taking a massive cut if they try to leave. But if you zoom out and look at the smartest property investors in the country, they're not panicking at all. In fact, they're ignoring the policy entirely. Now, we deal with quite a lot of high net worth individuals, as well as your mediums, and as well as your first time investors, as well as first time owner occupied. What we are seeing, especially on the higher end of the scale when it comes to multiple acquisition or multiple properties they've got, they tend not to freak out with a lot of this. They tend to go, how do you structure it better? And we've got quite a lot of interesting kind of structure in place that I want to do about. If you don't couple this next strategy with your current investing, you're going to be bleeding ATO for decades. Obviously, get yourself a good accountant. Important. The wealthy operate on a completely different plane field. While everyday investors are screaming about the government changing the tax rules, the smart money knows one universal truth. You cannot control tax policy, but you can absolutely control your tax structure. For decades, middle-class Australians have bought investment properties in their own personal name. They're wrong with that, good. They relied on kind of native gearing and that 50% CGT discount to build wealth. But the era is ending. If you hold property in your own name, when these CGT rules change, you are a sitting duck. So a top marginal taxpayer could see their effective tax on long-term gains jump from 23.5% up to 35.25%. Now, here is exactly what the wealth are doing instead. They're shifting away from personal ownership, and they're going to start doing fragmented ownership around family group mindset. What I'm saying by family group, instead of buying property, I say John Smith or Luis Velasquez, they are buying property using kind of layered and discretionary family trusts, unit trusts, bucket companies that retain kind of corporate earnings. Now, why did this matter? Because inside a trust or a company structure, capital is accumulated and reinvested internally rather than being extracted and taxed through massive personal income every single year. In a bucket company, your profit can be capped at a much lower corporate tax rate. Again, get yourself a great accountant. We know a couple of really good ones. Let us know so we could talk about structuring it a little bit more differently. Now, the wealthy aren't asking, how much do I personally pay this year for tax? They're asking, how much capital can my family retain and compound over the next 20 years? I know that's what I'm looking at, right? So the power of perpetuated saving, right? If a family improves its after-tax position by 20 grand a year, simply by having the correct structure, and they reinvest that money over 2 decades, it completely alters kind of the financial trajectory of the entire family. You stop relying on government's 50% discount because your structure already defends your wealth. Obviously, yes, they're still gonna F you in a lot of ways, which is crap, but the thing though is just like, well, try to mitigate it as much as you can. Now, I'm not saying that there's going to be an answer to get out of this whole CGT crap if they do it, right? Truthfully, there isn't. What you could do though is mitigate it. And that's what I think what people are kind of forgetting. They're like, oh, I still got to pay tax on it. It's like, yeah, but if you structure it well, it will be lower. And that's what I'm trying to get at. Like, structure is everything. If you can't delete it altogether, then mitigate it, better than doing nothing. Now, I want to be brutally honest, right? You can't just guess at this. You can't jump online, register a company for like $500, a bit more than that, by the way, and hope that you kind of bypass the ATO. So setting up trusts and bucket companies requires precise modeling based on leverage, your cash flow, your personality, and your long-term goals, which is important. That's why you need to get a good broker, a good investment broker. I don't understand, like a mortgage broker, by the way, does a lot of things. They do owner-occupied, refinances, investment. Get yourself an investment broker that understands structure that your accountant is doing. After that, then you got a good team behind you. Like, if they don't understand together, they'll never get it. It'll always be disjointed. So if your strategy is technically optimal, but doesn't actually fit your life, it will just completely unravel. And this is exactly what we do. My team and I have spent the last 10 years more helping hundreds of families engineer their property portfolios so they can retire quicker, wealthier, and with total clarity. And that's what's important. Eventually, yes, it's wealthier, but it's clarity. What do you want to do? What's your next steps? If you want to stop reacting to the government's tax changes and start positioning yourself like the 1%, click the link below to book a free strategy session with my team. We'll look at exactly what you're doing right now and map out your structure you need to protect your wealth moving forward. I don't care if you're an existing client, neither, and you're seeing this too. I don't care if this is your first property, your second, your third, and your 72nd property, which again is less than 1%. The whole goal here is to make sure that you are protected, that you understand, and just get some clarity, right? To wrap this up, the government is not your friend. They are heavily taxing the very people supplying housing to the country, all to cover up their own massive failures in planning, immigration, and infrastructure. And you know it's true. The CGT trap of 2026 is designed to squeeze the middle class. No one else, the middle class, your nurses, your friends, blue-collar workers, etc., and lock up the housing supply. Therefore, you have to stop playing their game. And truthfully, you need to also stop listening to people who has bought properties 30, 40 years ago. There was a different market, it was a different time. You need to understand that the rules of engagement has changed. Get people who are up to date with that. The people in the barbecues, they have zero clue. Usually mum and dads, well, I love mum, man. You've got to respect that there's probably some things that they don't know even now. So stop buying properties in your own personal name and hoping the rules won't change. Start treating your family's wealth like a corporation. Use trust, use bucket companies, and focus on compounding your returns behind a better structure. And you can't control the politicians in Canberra, but you can build a financial structure that makes it completely irrelevant. If you got value out of this video, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and kind of share this with anyone who we can bring it back to. Take control of your structure, and I'll see you in the next video. Hopefully that. And if you want to check out the podcast, click here too. I'll see you guys soon.